Feedback isn't about what went wrong. It's about what's next. And most teams, they don't resist feedback because it's hard. They resist it because it feels like correction, not clarity. So if your feedback conversations keep circling the same problems, I'm sorry to tell you, you don't have a performance issue. You have a direction issue. So today, we're going to turn feedback into that leadership tool that removes uncertainty. It's going to help you build trust, and it's going to set clear expectations for what we expect to happen next. Today, we're going to talk about one of the fundamental things, and this is a very small switch that we all can make. Instead of backward looking, we are going to focus forward. It's going to help us improve clarity in that direction. You're going to have 3 takeaways today. At the end of this episode, first, thank you for tuning in. You're going to be able to redefine what feedback looks like being future focused. We're going to talk about that 3-part feedback formula. You're not going to want to miss that. And we're going to even discuss how to embed microfeedback loops that are going to create clarity. It's going to work for you, I'm telling you. So stick with us till the end. Welcome to the Leaders Leading Leaders podcast. I am your host, John Espinosa, and we help retain and hire your best employees by building those high-performance teams. In the conversation today, we're going to talk about why your feedback isn't fixing anything. In this episode, we're going to shift from backwards to forwards. And I know it seems simple, but it is one of the most defining things when I coach and when I use feedback. This is a game changer. And it's a simple flip, but it will change the way that people receive your feedback. So let's get into the content today. The first topic, we're going to redefine how we think of feedback. Because if we're the ones giving the feedback, we have to understand that it's going to come off, even the word feedback for us. I just say it and the hair on the back of people's necks starts standing up and they get defensive. You'll see them kind of cross their arms. Try it. Next time you say, hey, I got some feedback for you, just watch. Watch the facial expressions. Watch what they do, their body posture. The word feedback can put people on edge and it gets them defensive. So we're already working behind the 8 ball. We're already behind the power curve when it comes to this feedback thing. And for, me as a leader, one thing, and I wrote this down, is to reframe feedback as a clarity tool in my mind. As a parent, we tell our children what not to do or what they did wrong or what's going to happen if they do it, the next time. That's feedback for them. But it's all looking backwards. Because you did this, because you were late, you look bad in front of the coach to soccer practice. That happens a lot at our house. So I have to make sure that I'm not looking backwards, I'm looking forwards. And for some people, that can be hard to do when it comes with feedback because we have been conditioned to use feedback as correction instead of changing a future behavior. So we have to get that in our minds that we have to continue to look forward. If we pull from backwards, past tense, and we're going to use specific words, what words can you use that are going to trigger that future tense? A lot of times people get defensive. And one of the things that I love to use as a technique for reframing feedback is this idea of past tense and future tense. And the example here is past tense would sound something like this. Here's what happened. And then you would provide some type of feedback. Future tense sounds more like this. Here's what happens next. So it's a very different conversation that we're getting ready to have. And for people to listen, here's what happened. You should have turned that report on. You should have checked up with that customer. Whatever happened, instead of here's what happens next. We're going to talk about the situation, and we're going to give you some steps or give you maybe some best practices that I've learned. I'm going to own it first. I'm going to own the fact that I'm here to help. I'm going to own the fact that this feedback session isn't punitive. We're looking forward. The mistake has already happened. Whatever happened is in the past. Now let's work forward. And just that simple flip in your mind will make the feedback session more palatable, more comfortable for the receiver. And that's where we need to start. That's one of the very first things. We need to make sure that we, as the giver of feedback, as the giver of a gift, you can even, consider it feedback as a gift. I've heard that many times, that we're looking forward. So, what I want you to ask yourself here, this is the application. These are practical applications. We don't live in philosophy here on this podcast. I want to make sure that you are taking something actionable that you can put to work. And this is where it's at. Your next feedback session, I want you to ask, what future behavior am I trying to create? Not correct, create. I have to remind myself all the time with my 17-year-old son that he's only been on this planet for 17 years. So his experience, his failures, his feedback, the way that he's received feedback is pretty short in the whole big scheme of things. Now for me, 45 years, I've been conditioned a little bit differently over those 45 years. With my idea of feedback, how I've gotten feedback, how I've given feedback. A lot of how we do things is based on the past. So we're going to have to, I'm challenging you to change the way that you think about feedback. And if you make that change, I can promise you it's going to come off completely different whenever you go and have those feedback sessions. So that's the first one. Redefine feedback. Make sure that we're feeding forward. We're not looking backwards. So now let's talk about how we deliver the feedback. This is just as important. Now that we've thought or talked about thinking about feedback a little bit different, let's talk about delivery. I'm going to give you a 3-part formula here. Feedback formula. This is gold. I've used this countless times. I've coached on this. I've gotten great feedback. So feedback on the feedback, no pun intended. So I want you to take out your notes, scribble this down. If you're out and about, don't worry. There's going to be a link in the show description. Make sure you click on that. It's easy. Give us some information, email, first name. We're going to send you the show notes. I mean, that's a win-win situation. So free. And while you're around clicking, find that subscribe button. Do me a favor, click on that. It's going to help us out tremendously. And I thank you for taking the time to listen in. So let's get to this 3-part feedback. This 3-part feedback starts out with observation. And when I talk about observation, I want to make sure that we're not robots. Let's just start there. As leaders, as business owners, whatever, you're doing, we're not robots. We have feelings. And when we observe something that should have gone better, and then we immediately want to give feedback on that, we're coming from a state of feeling and not what we actually observed, the behavior, right? What we saw. So that's the first step. We want to make sure to keep it objective, keep the feedback short, and make sure that it's behavior-based, not on feelings. What behavior are we giving feedback on? So that's step 1, observe. Step 2, we're going to clarify. And here we're going to identify what the expectation is. Now, this is where it's important to make sure that we're objective in our observation, because if we come from a state of feeling, emotion, and we try to tie it to a standard or an expectation, that's where wires get crossed. And most people are going to get defensive. They're going to get in that fight or flight response. and they are going to stand up for themselves. That's what happens when we have emotion and we try to tie it to some type of expectation. It never works out well for us. It hasn't worked out for me in the past. And I want to make sure that we're always using an objective behavior, and then we tie that to the expectation, or we go back to the standard. And this is where we're going to have to check ourselves. Because if we did not communicate the standard very well, remember, this season's all about communication. We're going to need to really check ourselves, take ownership. Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't communicate the expectation to you. I observed you maybe being short with a customer or sending an email that was, maybe had some misspelled words in it. Whatever the feedback correction is, make sure that it's observable, tie it to behavior, and then restate the expectation, whether that's in the form of a mission, fact-finding, questioning, whatever technique that you want to use there. But they have to tie together, because if you have feeling with some unknown expectation, we're not going to move forward. So we got to have an observable behavior, and we got to restate that expectation and tie the two together. So that's where we're going to clarify. And then third is alignment. We're going to check for our alignment. So here we're going to define what happens next, how we are going to move forward. Remember, we're focusing on feed forward, not backwards. And this will help us identify that next step. So maybe, I wrote down here, it needs to tie into really a next step, whether that's training or we're going to work one-on-one. The other day, I was having a conversation with my son, and he was missing some assignments. And this had been over 2 weeks. And I was focusing, the feedback I was giving is just get it done, talk to the teacher, figure it out, right? We use that feedback term a lot. Just figure it out. Is that observable? Is it, explain what the situation, what behavior that we're observing? It's not very clear. So we're not providing clarity. And, oh, by the way, I wasn't providing next steps. So instead, I had to check myself. I had to own that conversation, that I was providing backwards feedback. So how would you provide forward feedback? One of the ways that we did that, now we have a planning day. We sit down and we identify assignments, homework, projects, whatever has to be done within that week. We write it all down on paper, and then we plan. How are we going to get it done? When does it need to get done by? What are we going to do to check in, right? So it's very observable. Great feedback, because now what happens if you're not checking off what you need to be checking off? Now I can go back. The expectation is everything gets done on that list. So there's no confusion around what needs to get done. And the next step is we continually do this and grades are increasing. It's simple, right? I mean, I know you're telling yourself, well, that doesn't sound very hard. It isn't. And that's the whole point of this 3-part feedback process is 1, you start with something observable. 2, you make sure that you're clear about the expectations. And then 3, we outline the next steps. That's all it needs to be. And this can be, again, very short. Make sure that it's focused, and don't allow your feelings to walk into the conversation. So that 3-part feedback, it's gold. I'm just telling you, that's where it's at. But this next part, now what we're going to talk about is micro feedback and how we're going to make feedback constant. We're going to make it continuous. Because a lot of times what happens, we use it as a weapon. We weaponize feedback. And we do it in a way where something fails, something goes wrong, a mistake happens, and here comes the feedback conversation. Well, if you are conditioning your team that feedback is only given when something goes wrong, wouldn't you think that everyone else thinks that feedback is bad, it's negative? You're exactly right. Why? Because we're the ones conditioning them to have that perception of feedback. So that's the problem that I see a lot of times is we only give feedback when something went wrong. So really the solution to that is let's make it constant. Let's make feedback one of those things that is built into our culture. And the way that we're going to do that, we're going to keep feedback short. Doesn't need to be a long conversation. And if we use the framework that we just outlined, the 3-part framework, we're going to keep it short. We're going to make sure that we're consistent. We're consistently giving feedback when things are good and when we need to correct. And then last but not least, we're using it as a way to calibrate, not correct, to calibrate, to tweak. So what does that look like? For me, I wrote down 3 things here. It could look like a 20-second correction at the end of a meeting. It could look like just a quick follow-up instant message or a text to clarify the next steps. Or it could look like addressing a behavior is close to when that behavior, when we got out of alignment, happens. And we do one behavior at a time. How many of us out there, when something goes wrong, it was a string of behaviors that happened. Maybe you woke up too late and car didn't work, or you were having car trouble. You got a flat tire on the way to work. You show up to work late. You were late to a big meeting or a presentation. There's a whole bunch of behaviors that happen from the time you woke up to the time that you were late getting in the office. And you take that employee, you bring them into your office, and you just dump on them. You tell them everything that they did wrong. Well, you should have woke up earlier. You should have checked, your tire pressure last night. You should have gotten here in enough time to prep for the meeting and check your presentation because your slide presentation was an outdated presentation. And oh, by the way, you're going to be docked, an hour or 2 hours, or you need to take sick leave. That's a whole lot of stuff. One behavior at one time. I know there's a lot that went on, but you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere with that individual because they are going to be in defensive mode. They're going to start making excuses, not just to you, but to themselves. And it's not feed forward. It's all back. It's all what happened, not what happens next. So one thing that, I want to leave you all with is feedback is a gift. It really is a gift. And for us, especially that we give feedback all the time, that's the challenge is I want for the application for this particular part, where are you giving feedback? Just micro feedback. Challenge yourself to give micro feedback every single day, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's with your significant other, or all 3 places. It's going to change the way that people perceive how feedback is given and how it's received. So, one thing I want to, just finish us up with is make feedback a tool for alignment. It doesn't need to make people anxious. And ask yourself, what's one expectation that's still living inside your head instead of in writing? Put that on paper. Because great leaders, we don't use feedback to revisit the past. We use it to reinforce the future. And your team's going to know exactly what the next step is when a performance issue arises. So if you want to create that workplace that everyone wants to work in, create a workplace where feedback builds clarity, not confusion. It's time to strengthen the way that we communicate as a team. So check out our programs, enroll in one today. I coach on these strategies. I help leaders hire, keep, and grow the talent that you have. So join today, build the confidence, build your high-performance team because you deserve it and your organization deserves it, and most of all, your team deserves it. I believe in you. Go be great. See you on the next episode.